Happy WrestleMania week, folks, and welcome to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the Lita episode of Broken Skull Sessions that dropped on Friday, March 25th, 2022. A lot of content coming this weekend to try to stay on top of it all, including the WWE Evil show that just started last Thursday on Peacock. They released all 8 episodes of that first season, if they even do a second season, which I hope they do, because it seems like a cool concept. I haven't watched a full episode of the show yet. I will at some point. I will be breaking them all down here on the channel. I will be breaking them all down here on the channel at some point. I'm going to try to watch the first episode in Hollywood Hulk Hogan tonight before Raw. I'm going to try to do the review at some point this week. I'm flying out for Mania to Dallas on Wednesday, so maybe I'll have that up on Friday or Saturday. I'm not exactly sure yet, but the episode reviews will be up in increments here on the channel over the course of the next couple of weeks. I'm not going to be able to binge them all at once. They're like an hour long each, so I'm definitely not going to do it like, oh, all 8 episodes today. You know what I mean? I just don't have the time right now. There's a lot of other stuff going on. But I did make time today to watch Broken Skull Sessions with Lita. This was a very good episode. The usual 90 minutes. I was surprised they dropped it this past weekend and not next weekend when WrestleMania is starting, but maybe they have something else planned to air on Peacock before or after Mania. On both nights, but this was really good though. So they started off, Steve Austin and Lita do, by talking about when they last saw each other. Probably WrestleMania 30 was likely the last time when Steve Austin was on the show. Lita was being inducted to the WWE Hall of Fame that weekend. She says that she feels good most days physically, despite her neck being in bad shape many, many years ago, but she feels like she gets hurt now on like the smallest things, like she'll tweak her knee and like doing something dumb, or while training, not really anything major, which is good to hear considering she had a lot of big major injury scares over the course of her career that they get into on this episode. She mentions how facing Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's Championship at Elimination Chamber last month was one of the best experiences of her life. I'm not sure if she meant professionally or personally or both, but she really had a chance, she said. She was really happy to have that chance to soak in every moment of that run. And the funny thing about it was that she actually got asked about that opportunity to face Becky at Elimination Chamber when she walked through Gorilla, not going out, but coming back in from being in the ring at the Royal Rumble back in January. She walked through Gorilla. She had just gotten eliminated from the match, I think by Charlotte, or I forgot who it was by, Mickie James, or I think Lita eliminated Mickie James. I forgot who eliminated Lita, but she comes through Gorilla, and Johnny Ace asks her, hey, I know you want that match with Becky, and she goes, yeah, for sure. And he says, would you want to do it in a couple of weeks? And she goes, yeah, absolutely. And they ended up booking it for Elimination Chamber like right then and there, which is pretty cool. Then obviously she came out on Raw the next night, so it was a very last minute thing. But speaking of last minute, that 2018 Rumble appearance was last minute. She mentioned that I think they called her like the day before to do that match, which is really fucking weird when you think about the fact that they knew they were doing that Women's Rumble at least a month in advance. They announced it on Raw, like on one of the final Raws of 2017, I remember. So they knew they were doing that match many weeks in advance. There were rumors for a while, oh, is Trish going to be in it, Lita, blah, blah, blah. So apparently it wasn't even finalized. Like, why wouldn't you know for a fact that Lita would be in the match until like literally the day or two before? It doesn't really, maybe she could have trained anyway, but why would you train for something you don't know is coming? That sort of thing. But they confirmed her for the match, and she was really nervous, and it was the wrong kind of nervous, and she at least had a chance to train for this year's Rumble. Would have liked to have a couple of more months to train and prepare, but it still went swimmingly nonetheless. She actually rewatches the match with Steve, not the match that she had with Stone Cold, but she rewatches the Becky Lynch match with Steve here on the show, and she mentions how she doesn't really watch her stuff back a lot. So this was her first time rewatching the match since it happened a few weeks ago for the Raw Women's Championship. And she admits she had doubts going into the match, and the ref had kind of had to remind her at certain points to breathe, to kind of remind her to breathe. And she thought it was because she was gassed. It wasn't because she was gassed. It was because she was really nervous and excited, and she was kind of going, not through the motions, but the exact opposite. She was really into it and immersed in whatever. He told her, listen, take a step back, breathe, enjoy the moment, that sort of thing. And she also talks about how it was cool to be among the first women to be on a billboard in Saudi for that pay-per-view, which is pretty sweet. And she also mentioned how being announced for the Rumble in advance, which was a very bizarre thing when they did that. They announced her in advance for the Rumble weeks earlier, like at the beginning of January. And I was at the SmackDown when they broke that news. And she mentioned it was weird initially. She's like, oh, I don't run the company. I wouldn't do that. The Rumble is all about the surprises. Why would you do that? But then she says, you know what? It was the best thing for me, in her words, because she got to connect with the crowd, appear on a SmackDown or two right before the pay-per-view, get that great reaction and feed off of their emotion and be a lot less nervous when it came time to be in the ring at the Rumble, which that was pretty cool. Steve mentions that she's billed from North Carolina. She's not from North Carolina. They probably bill her from North Carolina because that's where the Hardys are from. Or are they from South? I think it's North Carolina is where they're from. It's probably why they bill her from North Carolina, because that's where they started billing her from, and they never changed it. She's actually from Florida, Fort Lauderdale, if I'm not mistaken, I think she said here. She mentioned how her father was a salesman growing up in Florida, so he kind of moved all around the state. As far as she went, she swam, she did swimming, she also did judo growing up, and she mentions how Rey Mysterio changed her life. And a lot of the stories that are shared here, by the way, on this podcast, on this episode of Broken Skull Sessions, a lot of which she shared before, actually in a podcast with Steve I remember listening to on his Podcast One show years ago, like right after she got inducted into the Hall of Fame. She mentioned a lot of these stories in her Hall of Fame speech that went on for a while, but they're all great stories, so I don't mind reliving them here. But she mentioned how Rey Mysterio changed her life. And she got into wrestling because of her boyfriend at the time, and she loved the fact that the wrestlers were like rock stars, but they were simultaneously athletes as well. And she started telling people, I'm going to become a wrestler, without actually knowing how she was going to become one, But what she loved about Rey Mysterio specifically was the fact that he made it believable. He could go out there, have a great match, and also be able to beat a guy like Kevin Nash. Realistically, does that make sense? More often than not, no. But in wrestling, you kind of suspend your disbelief to a certain extent, and it's believable, and it worked for Rey Mysterio. So, because Rey Mysterio was obviously big in Mexico, grew up in Mexico, started wrestling in Mexico, she thought that she had to train in Mexico, because other than Rey, who knew pretty good English, none of the other luchadors she was watching at that point knew how to speak English. So she thought, okay, I got to go to Mexico, and that's where I'm going to learn to train to become a professional wrestler. So she moved to Mexico soon after that, paid a ticket to see a show, spent a lot of her money that she had at that point to go see this wrestling show. Was almost going to take a subway back to where she lived. Some guy encouraged her, no, don't do that. It's not, not great parts over here. She's like, oh, no, I know where to go. And he offered her a ride. And I'm thinking that was not going to end well, but it actually ended up being a positive story in that she formed a bond with this guy, and he ended up bringing her to the show like 3 times out of the week. And they kept wondering, why does she keep showing up at these shows? And she's like, well, I want to do this. I want to train. So they let her train at the school, which is pretty cool. She mentioned that she stayed at like a low-rent apartment with aspiring Mexican reporters, I guess. So completely random, but she had confidence in herself, and she mentioned she attributes that confidence to constantly moving around as a kid, always moving around from place to place, and she created that confidence. She built that confidence over time. And she just wanted to work. She wanted any work, whether it be as a wrestler, as a valet. She would always ask people that she worked with, that she trained with, what do you got for me this weekend? And she would really do anything that came her way. She was a hustler. In a good way. She hustled, and she was constantly on the grind, not like hustling people in the wrong way. I should probably specify. She learned, she tried to learn from the right people and knew whose advice to take and kind of based that off their credibility and whatnot. But from there, she traveled all across the states, primarily in the South and in Texas and the Carolinas and stuff like that. And showing up at ECW, she just got randomly a job one day at ECW by just simply showing up at the show in North Carolina. I guess that's another thing, too. She's probably billed from North Carolina, not just because of the Hardys, but maybe because she started there or lived there for a little while. But anyway, so she went to the show just hoping to help put up the ring. And in doing so, she thought that would be her in to get a match on the show, which is exactly what happened. So she stuck around, wrestled in the ring for a little bit with her friend that she was there with. Tommy Dreamer pulls her aside. She's thinking that she's in trouble. She's going to get kicked out. Why would you do this? Blah, blah, blah. He actually says, go put a 5-minute match together with your friend. And out of that, because they impressed, they earned a spot on the show. And she became Miss Congeniality, excuse my botch there, out of that. And that was Paul Heyman's idea. Not exactly sure what the character was supposed to be. I'm not overly familiar with that aspect of her career, so I can't really speak too much. I can't speak much to that. But she stuck around in ECW for a little bit, managed some people. Wasn't there for an extended period of time, but it was what it was. She trained from there at the Funkin' Conservatory. Now, when Steve Austin said Funkin' Conservatory, I thought he said fucking. I'm like, why wouldn't they bleep that? And then I'm like, oh no, he said the Funk Dojo. He didn't say the Funk Dojo, he said Funkin' Conservatory, but that's what he meant. Maybe that's what it was called. I've always heard it called the Funkin' Dojo or Funk Dojo, whatever. But anyway, so she almost went to WCW after that, after learning a lot from the Funks. due to Terry Taylor. He was, I guess, in ECW. He went to WCW. He wanted her there, but her mind was set and her heart was set on WWE. Jim Ross called her from there, offered a developmental deal of sorts, and she got a job with WWE. So she talks starting with WWE, being paired with Essa Rios from the get-go, and rewatches that debut, I think, on Heat. I don't know if it was on Raw. I think it was on Heat at that point. And pulling off that awesome, what is now known as the Lita Salt, a great moonsault from Lita. Maybe not the best moonsault of all time, but it was, very special for her character, and you didn't see a lot of the women doing that at that point, so it was pretty revolutionary as far as that goes. She talks about how much she loved working with Eddie Guerrero, how much of a pro he was. No surprise there. Steve Austin asked her, how young did you actually start in WWE? And she said, around 23, 24, because she couldn't rent a car yet, and you have to be 25 to do that. That's still the case today, so that's how she knew that she was less than 25 when she started with WWE. She crossed paths initially with the Hardys on the independent scene, probably in the South, in the Carolinas, whatever. And the writers in WWE at that point liked the look of them together because they look like a band. They look like someone that you would be friends with, someone that wasn't over the top like Ultimate Warrior had his appeal because he was like a superhero-esque character. They needed more people that you could relate with. The Hardys were people that were cool, you could relate with, you wanted to be their friend, you looked up to them, and that's why Lita worked so well and blended so well with the Hardy Boys. And she mentioned how working with the guys at that point in various matches actually helped her out a lot, lent her a lot of credibility in the eyes of the fan base, and she would always thank those guys, every guy that she worked with in the ring, like in the ring intergender matches, for letting them hit her or letting her hit them with her moves. She would always tap him on the leg afterward, I guess, and they showed footage of that with Albert, which was funny. Now known as Matt Bloom, A-Train, whatever. What's his other fucking name? Tensai from 10 years ago. So I thought that was cool. They rewatch her interference of WrestleMania 17 in the TLC match with the Hardys, Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, and the crazy spots that she was a part of in that match. And she mentioned how being a part of that show, that match, in one way or another, really solidified those tag teams as top performers. She also rewatches beating Stephanie McMahon on Raw, with help from Triple H and Rock and people like that. I think the main event of Raw that night, for the Women's Championship. And she never actually believed it would happen until it happened. I think that was her first women's title. And she didn't want to get her hopes up until she was pinning Stephanie in the ring on the show, 1, 2, 3, and she became champion. She wanted to keep the focus on the guys who were in the ring, Rock, Triple H, because they were the primary focus of that segment. The women's match itself was kind of an afterthought. So she quickly left the ring. But in retrospect, she kind of realizes maybe I could have gotten the endorsement from The Rock real quick and then left the ring. Because the moment was about her, too. They didn't want to, she shouldn't have kept it completely on the guys. It really was her moment, but from a storyline standpoint, they wanted to keep the focus on the guys. They could have found out a way to kind of make it more even, I would think. Anyway, so she had to make her moves while she was champion make more sense. And she wasn't in there just doing spot fests and just hitting her signature spots. She had to make her matches make more sense and have actual matches now that the pressure was on with her being champion. She talks dating Matt and how that was easy because both were very career-focused at that point and didn't really have the issue of, I can't come home today because I'm working on this with work, because they were both in the business and they were both on the road anyway, so it worked and it was easy. They don't really go any further with the Matt relationship stuff beyond that. They don't really need to. And I'll get into more of this stuff they left out of this episode by the end here of my review. But they don't really go any further with the Matt Hardy stuff, nor do they really need to. She mentions how she went to Dr. Tom Pritchard a lot for match stuff, for a lot of guidance and input in her matches. They rewatch her Judgment Day 2001 match with Chyna, where she won the women's championship off of her. And I think that was Chyna's final match in WWE. She talks her relationship with Chyna and how Chyna really took her under her wing at that point. And they had a lot of ideas for their match, but they didn't get a chance to go there. For whatever reason, WWE officials probably wanted to be a standard women's match and whatever. So, but she ends up like I said, she doesn't rewatch a lot of her stuff, but in watching it back here, she realizes it was better than she originally remembered it being. So she talks breaking her neck on the set of a show called Dark Angel. Maybe it was a movie, I don't know. But she was filming in the show, and she got hurt. She kind of talks us through how it happened and how it was the other person's fault without putting a lot of blame on them, even though it was their fault. They all thought it was a stinger at first. They said, give her 5, she'll be fine. It's probably just a stinger. She really wanted to power through, and she thought it was just a broken collarbone, but it got to a point where she really couldn't do anything. It was a broken fucking neck. Like, it was a pretty serious deal. She found out from the doctor later on that she broke her neck in 3 places. And if she sneezed, she coughed, did anything like that, because she had broken pieces of bone in like floating around, floating bone in her neck or whatever, she could have been paralyzed. So pretty scary stuff. She got advice actually from none other than Steve Austin as far as how to deal with it, what surgery does she get, is her career over, and she was really nervous going into that whole thing, but he helped her out a lot in giving her advice and stuff like that, which I thought was cool. And from that point forward, she knew she'd be okay. She says that she had level 2 fusion as well, and she felt useless because she couldn't really do anything. Her in-ring career was on pause for right now. So as a result of that, she started volunteering at animal shelters. She didn't even work there. She kind of pretended that she had a job there, and she would put her name on the schedule so she can kind of make use of her time and do something useful, which I thought was pretty cool. During which point, she couldn't watch the product, she said. It just pained her too much to know that she wasn't there. They were making progress without her. She hated doing commentary when she did come back, because she would have to commentate on these other women, her competition, like her peers and stuff, and good for them for succeeding, but it really ate her up inside knowing that she couldn't be out there doing it at that point. And I think the initial timetable for her return was around a year, which I think is like standard procedure for like neck injuries, which tells me that Big E's probably going to be out for a while, if not forever. Hopefully not, but at the very least, he probably won't be back for a long time, if not until like next year, I would think at this point. But yeah, so she found out that her timetable for returning was about a year, and as they inched closer to the 12-month mark, she realized she still wasn't ready, and ended up coming back like 15 months later instead of 12, which was good, and ended up feeling a lot better when she ended up coming back eventually. When she came back, she was kind of forced to change her style. The office didn't want her doing the moonsault all the time and stuff like that. She would save it for bigger matches. They rewatched the steel cage match that she had on Raw in the main event of Raw with Victoria. Very good match. She enjoyed being a part of that match and just being a part of the boys club, as she says, and kind of making progress in that respect and wanting to be seen on the same level as the guys, which I thought was cool. She talks her relationship and meeting Trish Stratus and how the best dynamic with those two in the ring, because they were really close, but on TV they were polar opposites as characters. The best dynamic was Trish as the heel, because she could play that role really well, and Lita playing the babyface. They rewatched their Raw main event from December 2004, where they made history as the first fully focused on women's championship match in the main event of Raw ever, which I thought was cool. And she said the pressure was good going into the match because they knew they could deliver. It wasn't long after that, unfortunately, they had a match at the New Year's Revolution 05 pay-per-view where Lita injured her ACL. She couldn't continue. And she can't even watch it. Like, she can't even look at the footage of her injuring her ACL. It doesn't look that bad on like replay, but she just knew how it felt in that moment, and she can't rewatch it. And it was really, really hard to come back from. She almost calls it an underrated injury in that people don't realize how bad of an injury it actually is, because the rehab for it is awful. And they kind of fast forward a little bit to when she came back and the match with Trish at Unforgiven 06. She already knew at that point that her last match was coming up herself. At Survivor Series, it would be 2 months later. So it was cool that she was honored that she got to have Trish's last match as well for the Women's Championship at Unforgiven 06 and Trish's native Canada as well, which is cool. They recall the storyline with Kane, and she really enjoyed it. I mean, it was awkward and weird, but she enjoyed it because she got to get close to Kane, who was one of the nicest guys in the business, as Steve Austin says here. They rewatched the wedding with Edge that Kane crashed, which was a great angle, one of the most memorable segments in Raw history. A lot of the segments, like most memorable Raw segments, do feature Lita and Edge from that time period. Lita, Edge, and Kane, that is. All three of them. She talks turning heel and how she hated coming to work sometimes. And again, this is the stuff we've heard a million times from her before, which is why I'm sure they didn't go more in depth with it than they did. But yeah, they used the heat to their advantage. I mean, she didn't like being that person because she wasn't that person in real life. Her character was everything that she wasn't. But she kind of figured out how to manage it and kind of how to nail that character because she always did the opposite of what she would normally do. Like, what would I normally do as a person? Okay, I'll do the opposite of that on TV, which makes sense. They rewatched the Raw promo she cut right before she retired in November 06, where she mentioned that her last match was coming up. She was the women's champion. People didn't respect her and all this other stuff, and she broke her neck for this company, and people didn't care. And she said that promo really felt great because it gave her a chance to speak her mind of all the things she was experiencing in her life at that point that she didn't have a chance to didn't have a chance prior to that point to really air out her grievances on WWE TV. Her last match did come with Mickie James at Survivor Series in '06 for the Women's Championship, losing to her and relinquishing the the WWE Women's Championship. And she praises Mickie for being a great competitor and a great opponent. The reason why she walked away, she says, is that she felt old at that point, and she was 30 years old, which is nothing. She felt the division getting younger, and she felt too old, which is just ridiculous at this point, because, I mean, Shayna's, I think, either 40 or nearing 40. She's almost 10 years older than what Lita was at the time that she retired. Lita did start young, to be fair, but Lita, if she wanted to, I mean, clearly that wasn't the sole reason she mentioned that here. It wasn't like, oh, I feel old, I shouldn't be here anymore. Like, that wasn't the only reason. If that was the only reason, that would be silly, because there's so many people now, and even at that point, they would bring in, and it is true that WWE and women's wrestling just in general, it is an awful precedent where with women, like, they see them, oh, they're 40, they're too old, yet we have, like, fucking 60-year-old Sting in AEW, or 50-year-old Chris Jericho, you know what I mean? Like, just doesn't make sense. But anyway, by the end there, she felt like it became all about the paycheck, and she didn't want to be that person. She didn't feel like she could give 100% anymore, and she kind of transitioned out of wrestling, had a retirement match, talks transitioning into civilian life, spent some time in Nicaragua, which was really cool for her, and really got to become a normal person for a change, regaining sleep and realizing how tired she was for such a long time on that WWE grind. They talked the Hall of Fame induction over WrestleMania 30 weekend, and it really gave her a chance to reflect upon getting that phone call and being inducted into the Hall of Fame in early 2014, to really give her a chance to look back on the cool things she did over the course of her career. And it's cool for her now to watch the current women do their thing and come into their own and kill it. And she's at peace now with everything that she's done, and at peace now with where she is in her life. And she also talks still working with animals and people, and still doing cool things outside of the ring as well. So that was really about it. Like I said, they kind of skipped over some stuff there with the Matt Hardy breakup. They did reference it. They did talk about it to an extent. Not nearly as in-depth as she has in other interviews and tell-all stuff and whatever. Didn't talk about the bad breakup. Didn't talk about the live sex celebration. Didn't even really mention the fact that her farewell was pretty shitty with the whole crime time. Oh, we're going to sell her panties here, like on live TV. It was so fucking dumb. They skipped over all of that. Probably, as far as like the Matt Hardy and the live, I mean, the Matt Hardy thing, I can only imagine they didn't bring it up because, one, they don't really need to. We all kind of know what happened there. And two, it just doesn't inspire a lot of positive feelings with Matt, with Lita, with Edge, I'm sure. They don't really get any of that, nor do they really need to. That's all personal stuff. We've heard it told a million times before on this very fucking streaming service. So I'm glad they didn't really go into that. The live sex celebration, I'm surprised they didn't mention, just because it's one of the most highest rated segments in Raw history. It is weird looking back at it now. They're no longer together, are Lita and Edge. Edge is now married to Beth Phoenix. Lita's doing her own thing, so I can kind of see why they wouldn't want to cross that bridge, even though it was a big part of her career and what a lot of people, unfortunately, for better or for worse, think of when they think of Lita. So I'm surprised they didn't mention. I'm not disappointed they didn't, but I'm just surprised they didn't. And I'm also a little surprised they didn't mention her farewell, quote unquote, when she got fucking disrespected on the way out. Maybe she didn't want to bury the company because she's in good graces with them now. I'm not sure. That was a pretty awful way for her to retire. They don't really talk about the match with Mickie at all from that pay-per-view. Beyond that stuff, they covered a lot. This was around 90 minutes, like I said. Really good interview, a great conversation between two longtime friends. So can't complain. This is the usual great stuff from Steve Austin. Check it out right now on Peacock. Broken Skull Sessions, the Lita episode. And thank you guys for checking out my review of this very episode of Broken Skull Sessions. I appreciate it. Big week ahead here for WrestleMania week here on the channel as well. A lot of interviews going on. My interviews with Charlotte Flair, that went up last Friday. Eric Bischoff we got coming this week. Dolph Ziggler and a mystery guest coming up on Friday. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Never miss an episode, or video rather, as they drop almost every single day. So in addition to that, be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Like I said, all that stuff is greatly appreciated. And hit that bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. Have an awesome rest of WrestleMania week, guys. It's going to be a busy one, yet a fun one. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.